The sun rose over the red earth of Ogbomosho, casting a golden hue over the village. For Amaka, it was a familiar sight, a promise of another day of hard work and quiet determination. Her mother, Mrs. Sandra, was already up, pounding yam for their morning meal. The rhythmic thud of the pestle against the mortar was the soundtrack to Amaka's life, a testament to her mother's relentless struggle. They lived in a humble mud brick house with a zinc roof, but what they lacked in material wealth, they made up for in spirit. Amaka was a prodigy. She had a mind that soaked up knowledge like the parched earth drank the first drops of rain. Her intelligence was a beacon, shining brightly in a world of shadows. It was this brilliance that had won her a scholarship to St. Catherine's Academy, a prestigious secondary school in Lagos, far from their village. It was a dream come true, but it also meant a new kind of struggle, one where she was surrounded by children who had never known hardship. She felt the weight of her mother's sacrifices on her shoulders and was determined to repay them with her success. On the other side of Lagos, in the sprawling manicured estate of the Olatunji family, life was a symphony of ease and opulence. Jennifer Olatunji lived a life most could only dream of. Her father, a titan of industry, and her mother, a renowned socialite, had provided her with every conceivable luxury. Their love for her was boundless, a desperate, almost suffocating affection born from a decade of yearning for a child of their own. Jennifer had grown up believing she was the centre of the universe, and her world was a carefully curated bubble of privilege. When Jennifer started at St. Catherine's, she was confident and commanding. But that confidence was immediately challenged by a girl with a fierce glint in her eyes and a mind sharper than a newly honed knife, Amaka. From the moment Amaka answered a complex mathematical question with effortless grace on the first day, a seed of rivalry was planted in Jennifer's heart. She was used to being the best, the most admired, and this girl, with her ill-fitting uniform and quiet confidence, was a threat. Jennifer despised Amaka not for who she was, but for what she represented, a challenge to her effortless superiority. The animosity between them grew over the months. Jennifer, with her entourage of rich friends, would mock Amaka's simple belongings and lack of social graces. Amaka, in turn, would ignore the taunts, her focus unwavering, her grades a constant silent rebuke to Jennifer's arrogance. They were like two planets orbiting the same sun, their paths crossing in a hostile dance, completely oblivious to the shared celestial origin that bound them. Years passed, and Amaka's mother, Mrs. Sandra, found it increasingly difficult to make ends meet. The scholarship covered tuition, but the expenses of school supplies, uniforms, and transport were a constant burden. A friend from their village, who worked as a house help in Lagos, told her about a cleaning position in a wealthy household. The pay was good, and the hours were flexible. Mrs. Sandra took the job without hesitation. The Olatunji mansion was a world away from her village home. The sheer size of the house, the polished marble floors, and the gleaming surfaces were overwhelming. She went about her work with a quiet dignity, scrubbing and polishing every corner of the house with a meticulous care that belied her humble origins. She was a silent, almost invisible presence in the grand house. One afternoon, as she was polishing the antique mahogany dining table, Jennifer strode into the room, tossing her school bag onto a chair. Mrs. Sandra, startled, straightened up and offered a respectful nod. Jennifer barely looked at her. "What's your name?" Jennifer asked, her tone dismissive. "Sandra, ma'am," Mrs. Sandra replied softly. "You're new here," Jennifer stated, already bored. She glanced at the school bag she had thrown on the chair. A textbook had fallen out and her eyes caught the name neatly inscribed on the cover, Amaka Sandra. Jennifer's blood ran cold. The face of her academic rival flashed in her mind. Sandra! Amaka's mother! She spat out, the words laced with a venom Mrs. Sandra had never encountered. A flicker of hurt crossed Mrs. Sandra's face, but she quickly masked it. "Yes, ma'am. Amaka is my daughter." From that moment, Jennifer's hatred for Amaka found a new, more potent outlet. She began to use Mrs. Sandra as a proxy for her anger. Jennifer would deliberately leave messes for her to clean, toss her clothes on the floor just after the room had been tidied, and speak to her with a condescension that bordered on cruelty. The kind, elderly housekeeper who had been there before Mrs. Sandra had been given her notice, and Jennifer saw this as an opportunity to cause chaos and trouble. "Old woman, can't you see this is not clean?" she would scold, pointing to a speck of dust Mrs. Sandra hadn't noticed. Mrs. Sandra would simply apologize, her head bowed low, her heart aching. She knew Jennifer's behavior was a reflection of the rivalry with her daughter, but she couldn't understand the depth of the girl's malice. Each day she would go home and pray for her daughter's safety and for Jennifer's heart to soften. The universe, however, had a different plan. One evening, Jennifer complained of a terrible headache. The next morning, she was too weak to get out of bed, her body racked with a high fever. Within a few days, her condition worsened dramatically. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Olatunji, panicked. They flew in the best doctors from around the world, but no one could pinpoint the exact cause of her illness. It was a rare, mysterious blood disorder, and her doctors confirmed she would need an urgent blood transfusion. The wealthy couple were distraught. They were prepared to spend their entire fortune to save their beloved daughter. They were tested first, but their blood types didn't match Jennifer's rare one. The news was a devastating blow. They issued a public appeal, offering a colossal sum of money for any donor whose blood matched Jennifer's. The story was everywhere, on television, in the newspapers, and on social media. The entire nation held its breath. Mrs. Sandra, sitting in the staff quarters, listened to the news report on a small radio. Her heart went out to the wealthy couple who had, despite their privilege, shown her a certain kindness. They had always paid her on time and had never been anything but polite to her. She thought of her daughter, Amaka, and her dream of going to university. The scholarship had helped, but there was still so much more needed. A thought struck her, a wild, almost absurd idea. Amaka had a very common blood type, O positive, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was a long shot. She went to her employers, her voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I heard about Jennifer's condition," she began, her eyes lowered respectfully. "My daughter, Amaka, she is a strong girl. Maybe her blood might match. She is willing to be tested." Mr. and Mrs. Olatunji looked at her, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. They knew about the rivalry between the girls and Jennifer's cruel treatment of her, but in this moment of crisis, they saw only a desperate flicker of hope. They agreed immediately. The next morning, Amaka and Mrs. Sandra went to the private hospital wing where Jennifer was being treated. Jennifer, pale and frail in the hospital bed, looked at Amaka with a hint of confusion. The usual fire of animosity was replaced by a vacant, weak stare. Amaka, seeing her rival so vulnerable, felt a strange pang of sympathy. A kind-faced doctor, Dr. Adebayo, took a blood sample from Amaka. As he conducted the tests, he was amazed. The blood was an exact match, a rare one. He rechecked the results, double-checking the labels. The compatibility was perfect, but something else was bothering him. He looked at Amaka, then at Jennifer's chart, and a question began to form in his mind. He ordered a DNA test on both girls, a routine procedure in cases of rare blood types to rule out any familial relations. He knew it was a long shot, but his gut told him to proceed. The results came back late that night. Dr. Adebayo stared at the report, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. The DNA profile of Amaka and Jennifer was a 100% match. They were not just related, they were twin sisters. The doctor's hands trembled as he called the Olatunjis and Mrs. Sandra into his office. He explained the blood match first, watching as relief washed over the faces of the Olatunjis and overwhelming joy filled Mrs. Sandra's eyes. Then, with a somber tone, he revealed the second, more shocking truth. He explained that a DNA test confirmed the two girls were twin sisters. He showed them the evidence, the identical genetic markers, the irrefutable proof. Mrs. Sandra collapsed into a chair, her hand over her mouth, silent sobs racking her body. Mrs. Olatunji, a woman of grace and composure, broke down completely, clutching her husband. For a moment, a heavy silence hung in the air, a mix of disbelief, shock, and dawning realization. Mr. Olatunji was the first to speak. "How is this possible?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Dr. Adebayo looked into the matter and investigated further. He conducted a background check on Jennifer's birth records. It was a well-known secret in the medical community that the nurse who had found a child for the Olatunjis had a history of selling newborns to desperate couples. The nurse had stolen one of Mrs. Sandra's twin daughters, Jennifer, shortly after birth, telling her that the second child was stillborn. She had taken the other to the Olatunjis for a significant sum. When the doctor discovered this, he was ready to report the case to the authorities, to take it up and bring justice. But Mrs. Sandra, through her tears, stopped him. "No," she said, her voice filled with a surprising strength. "No, doctor, don't report them." She looked at Mr. and Mrs. Olatunji, who were weeping openly. "They have been kind to me. They gave my daughter a good life. I have found my baby, that is what matters." The sight of this poor, humble woman forgiving them moved the Olatunjis to their core. Jennifer's recovery was slow but steady. Once the blood transfusion was complete, she regained her strength. When she was well enough, her parents sat with her and told her the truth. They told her about the day she was born, about the nurse, and about the terrible mistake they had made in their desperation. They told her that her cleaning woman, the one she had treated with such disrespect, was her biological mother, and that the girl she had hated so deeply, Amaka, was her own twin sister. The news hit Jennifer like a physical blow. The shame was a searing heat, a fire that burned through her body. The memories of her cruelty towards Mrs. Sandra and her relentless mockery of Amaka flooded her mind. She looked at Mrs. Sandra, who sat by her bed, holding her hand with such tenderness, and tears streamed down her face. "I am so sorry, Mummy," she sobbed, the word feeling both alien and perfect on her tongue. "I am so sorry for everything." Mrs. Sandra simply held her, stroking her hair. "It's okay, my dear. We have found each other now. That is all that matters." The reconciliation was a slow, emotional process. The Olatunjis, filled with gratitude and remorse, took it upon themselves to right the wrongs of the past. They offered Mrs. Sandra a generous compensation, which she initially refused. Finally, they moved her and Amaka to a new, fully furnished home in a nice neighborhood, complete with a garden. It was also agreed that Jennifer, who was still recovering, would live with them for a period to bond with her biological family. Jennifer, humbled and remorseful, embraced the idea. She spent her days learning new things in her new home, always chatting with her mother, Mrs. Sandra, listening to Amaka talk about school, and for the first time experiencing the simple, unpretentious joy of a family that had nothing but each other. Amaka's dream was also realized. The Olatunjis sponsored her to attend any university of her choice, anywhere in the world. She chose to stay in Nigeria, wanting to be close to her newly reunited family. Jennifer, too, was changed. The entitled princess was gone, replaced by a compassionate young woman who was learning to navigate a new life. She would now split her time between her two families, her biological one and her adoptive one, a bridge between two worlds bound by a love that had defied all odds. The twins' shadow had lifted, and in its place, a bond stronger than blood had been forged. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think about the story.